Thank you guys so much for being here. My name's Jillian Bakey. I am principal with Cress's Workplace Solutions Group. So we're a workplace consulting group. It's just for show. Okay. And we're really excited to share this panel with you guys today. It's been a roller coaster of a few years, and workplace strategy has existed, of course, long before the pandemic started. It really started to become a little bit more of a topic, and what does this workplace mean, and what's this convergence between our space and our people, and whether or not people can actually be productive outside of this office or not. So we've got some really great panelists here. I'm going to let them introduce themselves one by one. We're going to go through a few different questions, and then we'll definitely leave some time for questions at the end as well. But hopefully this will just give everybody a little bit of insight into how are companies thinking about this today, how are workplace experts thinking about this today, and where do we kind of go from here in this new frontier, if you will, of work. So starting right here with Tom Palucci, if you guys want to introduce yourselves one by one, maybe give yours a little brief intro about your background, the industry that you're in, and how you kind of fit into this question of workforce and workplace.
Hi, the microphone is nothing more than a prop. No, it's actually for the camera. Tom Palucci. I am the firm-wide director of interior design for a global architecture firm called HOK. If anyone's ever been to the Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C., yeah, okay, that's a building we did, along with 1,000 others. So I do corporate workplace for a living. I've been doing it with HOK for 25 years, and so I've seen a lot of trends, but I've never seen our world as it exists today. So it's a unique experience, and it's a unique opportunity, I think, for everyone, because change is good, and I think we're going to think about work in a very different way. I'm moving on.
Hi, I'm Brian Nishi, Senior Director of People and Culture at Havenly. Havenly is a virtual interior design services company. Headquartered here in Denver. We're about 120 employees, and then we have about 450 independent contractors who work as interior designers virtually in North and South America. I joined Havenly in November, and I was previously with a company called Go Spot Check, which was also a Denver-based startup headquartered at 15th and Market, and we were kind of like the epitome of like in the office, in-person culture. There was no remote work at all at that time. And now here we find ourselves in hybrid. I think there's like another level beyond hybrid. Hybrid we have like kind of assumes like everybody's still in the area and can come into the office, but then we also have like now this dispersed group of employees who have moved away. So maybe tribrid or something is what we should call that. But I think that situation makes it a much more complex conversation, which obviously we'll try and get into today.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm Will Gilbert. I'm the Employee Experience Manager at Inc. Communications. We are a PR and marketing agency for B2B tech and energy brands. So if any of you are looking for PR marketing, also please hit me up after this. I'd happily put you in touch with some people. I have been with Inc. for 4.5 years, specifically working in the internal comms and employee experience realm for about the last 2.5, specifically as the employee experience manager for the last year. I believe, I'm here to kind of serve as an example of, a company who has, gone through this and kind of has their own unique take on, what a hybrid workforce can look like and all that good stuff. But yeah, looking forward to it.
I'm Troy Lerner. I'm the CEO of Booyah Advertising, and Booyah is a digital ad agency, but I think the perspective I bring to the panel is, so I own this business. It's not funded. Our office is here in this building. Of our 130 employees, 80 of them or so are in Denver, and the rest are remote around the United States.
Great. We're going to start a little bit of the conversation just kind of hearing from each of the panelists on their personal experience. And Troy, I'm going to pick on you first because as a leader, leading during this time of kind of uncertainty and really just a lot of questions, regardless of if you did change or if you're going to change, everybody was asking the same questions. What are we going to do? What's right for us? How do we figure this out? What's sort of been your experience at Booyah, and how did you come to some of the decisions that you've been making around hybrid and flexible work that's implemented today?
Yeah, so part of our orientation to it is, I think sometimes we feel like a small player in a big pond. And what I mean by that is, I don't feel like we have much leverage with our workforce, right? If we were to require you to come to the office and you don't want to come to the office, we lose that staff, and it's very difficult for us to replace it. We don't have a lot of size and weight in that sense. And so I think we approach it very gently. And then what I would say about that gentle approach is we've also found that people are not able to accurately articulate what it is that they want. So when we survey and ask them what they want, it's very different. Maybe we can unpack this, but it's very different than what actually shows up in their actions. And so I think we've now taken the approach of less surveys and more data collection about what people actually do, and then we try to make our decisions based on what they're actually doing.
On a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being, evolves every 10, 15 minutes, how much change would you say Booyah has kind of gone through, specifically related to flexible work and preferences?
I guess we probably have a different outlook on it every 6 months or so. It feels like that's sort of the cadence of, in hot pandemic, I could imagine, gosh, we may never be going back to the office. I totally had my head around that. And pre-pandemic, I was 5 days in the office every week. You have to live in Denver. I'll never have remote employees. Swung all the way back, and now we're very much in a hybrid. The doors are open if you'd like to come in. You're not required to come in.
Great.
Yeah.
Good. Will, same question for you as the just employee experience manager. I'm sure that you've been very busy, of course, over the last few years as well. What's it been like at Inc.?
Yeah, we were pretty fortunate pre-pandemic that Inc. already had hubs in Denver, Austin, and New York, and with clients all over the U.S. And so we were very comfortable already, working between time zones, working through Zoom, working through Slack. And we also had a couple of work from wherever days a week already. So we were pretty familiar with what it was like to have a hybrid workplace. When the pandemic happened, it was a pretty easy transition for us, fortunately, in that regard. I think the biggest change that we ended up seeing was as we kind of started the conversation of what will it look like to go back. And we were also going through some of the biggest growth that our company has gone through in the entirety of the years that the company's been open in the last couple of years is, do we continue to only hire within those hubs? Do we start branching out? If we're going to go into this remote first work environment where we're still going to have these office destinations, as we call them, where people can go in, do we still only expect to hire people within those cities? And so I think that was sort of the biggest thing that we faced was sort of opening up what it would look like for us to go completely remote, still have the option to go in, but be remote first, start looking in other cities, and really opening up that pool. It also opened up a lot of opportunity for the people that we already had. A lot of folks who lived in Denver started moving out of the city. Same with Austin, same with New York, and started living other places, but they still wanted to work for Inc. They just wanted to move. And so we wanted to keep them, and we weren't going to lose them. So of course we were going to work with them in that regard.
Great. So some obvious wins there with some of those, I guess, just openness to the what-if situations is what I'm hearing.
Definitely. I think what's important, in all of this is just giving your employees the choice. I think obviously some of us are better at making decisions when we're given a lot of choices. Not one of them. Having a lot of options, doesn't always work well for me, but it is nice just to be able to say, today I really just don't feel like putting on anything other than sweats. I'm going to work from home. And so that's always it's just nice to have that option. But I think too, is being flexible with, yeah, we do the same thing. We send out surveys. We're constantly asking people for their feedback on what they want, but also being flexible enough to recognize that like those opinions are going to change. And so being able to kind of flow with that and work with that.
Brian, from your standpoint, Havenly obviously kind of bridges that gap between home and home office and the work from home and all of that. So how are you guys handling flexible work? What are you finding is working well or maybe not so well at your company?
So I mentioned in the intro, so we have this big group of interior designers who work as interior designers who work as independent contractors remotely. And I think when you think about like remote work that is functional and operational, if you have that many people in the same role, it's really easy to kind of like wrap it in like performance metrics and have like a very set system, right? And so I think like for roles where we have a lot of people doing the same thing, I think remote works well because there's a clear, I guess, path to accountability, right? I think where it gets muddy is with the employee group. We have some that work in the office a couple days a week, some that work 100% remotely. And I think like everybody else here, we're still trying to figure out what kind of the best solution is. We're really good with all the tools, right, that I think probably everybody in this room is working with. But I think where some of the biggest challenges are with some of the more junior employees who aren't kind of getting those lessons just like through observation of maybe more senior employees, right? Like we've hired some people straight out of college into 100% remote roles. And I think those are, to me, that's like where my biggest concern is when I think about like the people at our company. It's funny because I recall coming to a Denver Startup Week panel 3 years ago, and it was a panel on remote work. And this is when people were still like selling the value of remote work and trying to convince people, right, that remote work was the way forward. And they talked about hiring strategies, and they said, well, we hire people who have been entrepreneurs or business owners because they already have that kind of like sense of self-accountability. And that's great. If you're building a team with that in mind, that's great. But I think mostly everybody here, it's like we took the team we had and then went remote, right? And now we're trying to figure out, to that point of like, what do our employees want? Well, the answer is they all want something different because we didn't hire for like one situation.
Yeah. It's an interesting thought too. It's maybe perhaps not even so much what do employees want anymore. I know early on in the pandemic that was a big part of the conversation, right? What does our team need? What are they asking for? Because we want to respect those. But I think what a lot of companies found was that the further along, they didn't really just want to hand over a blank check to employees to say, what do you want? And it's really kind of balancing some of those, what does the organization need, alongside with how do employees work best. So Tom, kind of thinking from that standpoint, you've got the benefit of working with HOK and talking to clients all over. Early on, I think probably the question that we got asked most often was, what is everybody else doing? And at the time, there probably wasn't a lot of the best practices formed quite yet. But what are you seeing that you would say is maybe some of those emerging best practices, or how are the companies that seem to be doing pretty well at this remote and flexible work schedule, what are they doing to keep that momentum up and keep pulling out the good parts of remote and flexible work?
That's a really good question. I don't think anyone's really truly figured it out completely yet. I think what we're learning right now is that the challenge is less about space and more about the operational side of having a hybrid workforce. So operationally, from the perspective of how are you managing staff, how are you supporting staff, how are you using some of the tools that we're all using now in an effective way, because there's pros and cons to all of it. Slack is an amazing tool that is great for that instantaneous communication and tracking and things like that. But when younger employees are surveyed, they feel sometimes that they are overwhelmed by the amount of information that's coming at them. And it also feels as if, the proverbial shit rolls downhill. Like all of a sudden, it's the manager, then it's the next person in line, and all of a sudden people feel as if they're getting more workload put upon them than if they were sitting in an office and they were talking to other individuals or working on a team, because the style of communication is so different. You could solve something face to face in 5-10 minutes. Now it's this kind of ping pong back and forth, and you're following it and you're trying to stay on top of it while doing other things. And that might start to form a challenge. So what we're hearing more and more from our clients is we need help in the space of how do we manage our folks in a better and different way? How do we use these tools in a better and different way? And how do we develop some level of equity between those folks that might be sitting in space in the office versus those folks that might be working remote? And so I'm personally obsessed with the idea of video technology and how people are perceived. Like Zoom is crap because you're sitting there looking at, the Brady Bunch screen of all these little faces. And I think there's a bit of people on the other side can be disenfranchised by the fact that they don't have the same kind of presence in the room as those that might be sitting around the table. So I love what Google started to do with screen technology and trying to get the face as big as the person sitting in the room, so you have this kind of scale impression of folks being together. I think some of those things really matter, and that's going to be more and more of the trend of just making sure that people are feeling connected in a way that really works.
Mm-hmm. I think there's a lot of technology catch-up that has to happen because we all had to switch essentially to remote work overnight, and the technology was not. It was, emerging, it was there, it just hadn't had quite the runway. So in the meantime, before that emerges and before it, kind of catches up with where we're at, this is a question for any of the panelists. What are some of those maybe communication styles or management techniques? What are some of those more interpersonal things that have had to shift or have shifted that you guys have found have worked really well for your teams throughout this time?
So I think, obviously everybody had to shift from an in-office culture to an online culture. And our office culture was something that people always prided, were proud of about Inc. And that was something that really drew people in. And so we really had to examine, okay, how do we still keep people connected? All that good stuff. That's obviously what we're talking about anyway. But that, we were looking at, things like peer-to-peer recognition systems, things like that, so that, you weren't be able to, in person, give somebody a shout out and be like, hey, that was a really good job. Now let me do it online, through this app. I can attach a little bit of money to it. You can use that to get a, gift card or something like that. That's been a really big thing for us. It's also, upped our levels of recognition in general in the company. And so people are feeling more seen. People are feeling more appreciated in that regard. We've also used a tool called Donut, which helps us sort of do this sort of engagement with matching people up with a buddy system. So on a monthly basis, you get paired with somebody who you might not normally work with, and you just kind of set up a time for you to talk, whether you want to do that through a walking meeting, if you're in the same city, grabbing a coffee if you feel comfortable doing that, but just looking for those opportunities to create more of those touch points. And we also, changed the way that we did our internal comms. We started working with Axios HQ. I'm sure some of you received the Axios emails, but there's a way for you to use that platform for your own use, within your own company. And so it's all about creating these really bite-sized pieces of content for your employees to kind of consume, or your clients, or whoever you're sending that to. And that was a really big thing for us. And bringing up Axios, the other day I was in a webinar, and one of the speakers from Axios was talking about how you have to create or treat your communications almost like a political campaign, and that you just have to keep saying things over and over and over again until you're getting to the point of being almost sick of saying them. But that's the point when people are finally going to start receiving it and understanding it. And so, really it was just looking for those multiple touch points, different ways, different sort of mediums to get that across, because obviously people take in, information in different ways.
Troy, how about with Booyah? Anything from your side?
Yeah, I think the big technology winner for us has been not technology, actually, right? So it's been like to go the opposite of technology. So it's literally things like name tags, right? Like, because you're used to working with your small group online and in your Zoom conference, and then when you get in a company event, who are these people? And so it's name tags. It's I think we do things like we use Axios too. It is a good tool. It is a good tool. We do a thing called a lunch lotto, which is, we pull names from a hat and send a group of 5 or 6 people to go have lunch together, and just try to mix them up. And I think the idea is to take them away from the technology, because the technology is what allows you to be so impersonal, and look for all of the ways to get personal.
Great. I think there's a Seinfeld episode about name tags, if I recall correctly. How about Havenly?
I wanted to just repeat something that Will said about repeating stuff. That it's an interesting point just about the political campaign and not being afraid to repeat yourself, because we find that, or I see that in our office, where we have kind of a core group of in-office folks, which tends to be more of our kind of senior managers and leadership team. And they will have that same conversation on this topic 3 times, right? And then we talked about that topic on a team huddle or kind of all hands meeting in front of the company. And the feedback from the leadership team was, that was really long. Like, did we have to talk about it that long? And the feedback from the employees who were hearing it for the first time was like, that was great. That was so informative. That was so wonderful, right? But the point being, the leadership team, the people who are around these conversations all the time, you can tell them no, people need to hear this. You need to repeat yourself, right? But they don't feel that because they've had this conversation multiple times, right? So always being aware of kind of who's the audience that's looped into those communications is something in my role, right? I have to kind of champion and make sure that, no, this part of the company hasn't heard that, and sorry, you're going to have to give that message again. That's been really helpful for us. As far as technology, I think +1 on Donut, that one's good. I think anything that's automated and can be sort of assisted by people, I think is a good thing. The phrase that I heard years ago, culture is calendar, always sticks with me. It's what are the rituals that people can count on happening? And I think if it's something that's purely manual, either you have to have someone who's really good about doing it at that time on a regular basis. But if you don't have that person, that's where I think tools like Donut, or we use 15.5, right, for just weekly check-ins, and then people give high fives in the check-ins. That's integrated with Slack. But they get those reminders if it's time to fill out your check-in each week, right? And do you have any high fives to give this week? So I think having some automation there to help and just make sure those things consistently happen is what I would kind of focus on.
I think it's a great point. I mean, the habits that people have formed working in a pre-pandemic environment, unconsciously we had been forming them for years and years and years. And then with this new work styles that came in with these big changes, I forget what the statistic is, but there is a certain amount of time it takes for habits to be formed and change to actually take place and stick. And so there is a lot of change management that's happening with this, either directly or indirectly. A lot of companies are in the same spot of trying to figure out what are those habits, what are those rituals that we want to help stick as well. Kind of moving on to a different topic, I want to, just kind of think through a lot of the headlines that we've been seeing recently around work and the workplace and remote work or office work. If you are to read through some of them, it appears that there's this just truly extraordinary battle of wills happening, and that there's, just only 2 sides of the coin, that it's employees versus employers. Some of the ones that are around actually just this week are bosses are obsessed with returning to the office. Here's why it's already out of their hands. Or Apple workers tell CEO Tim Cook that we demand location flexible work. Or bosses want workers back by Labor Day and they're not going to go in without a fight. So you hear these headlines, and it just, it feels like there's this, very big issue that's driven by a lot of animosity between employers and employees. So my question, maybe Tom, we'll start with you on this, just with you kind of having a lot of different clients that you talk with, is do you feel like this is media frenzy? Is this, some headlines that are clickbait, and that there really is this huge misalignment between companies and their employees and how they're demanding or feeling? And then secondly, what would you say are kind of the two sides of that coin? What are some of the sticking points from an employer's perspective and from a company's perspective as we think through this?
Sure. So some of it's definitely, I think, clickbait. But I think, when we're talking about the Tim Cooks and the Jamie Dimons of the world, they have lots of outside pressures, right? Not just like shareholders, but like the cities within which they occupy space, right? And so, in New York, where I live, Jamie Dimon is obsessed with getting everybody back at JP Morgan Chase. He's building a brand new skyscraper that he'd like to have people in. That's an issue. But I also know that, the city is putting pressure on those organizations because the tax base has been eroded. We don't have enough people commuting in. We don't have enough people buying lunch or dropping their dry cleaning up. There's a lot that happens because of the way in which we've done business for so long and how we've occupied space in cities and thinking through all those levels of the economy. So I think, for us at HOK, those CEOs are dealing with a lot of information that they have to manage against. On top of the fact that I think there's a lot of folks that are worried about the culture of their organization and how to preserve that. And it's really cool listening to these guys because there are lots of ways and tools and ideas that can help to translate what a culture was into what the future of the culture could be without losing a business or losing the momentum, an organization might have had in their market prior to the pandemic. So, yeah, I have a lot of clients that are worried about their employees. They're surveying them to death. They're asking, every 6 months, do you want to come back? I have a couple of clients right now that have realized that hybrid work is here to stay in their organization, that they're not going to have an expectation of 5 days a week in office, that workplace will be less about individual heads down work and much more about collaboration, mentorship, learning, engagement with clients or outside folks. And so we're seeing that transition in terms of strategy and design for corporate clients right now. Yeah.
Does anybody else want to weigh in on that idea?
So I do think that there is that sense of us versus them, and the workers against the man. That's there. I think that's there. Yeah. Running a small business, I try to not allow the label. Like I'm not the man. Same team, bro. Like I am with you. I too want to do the minimum amount of work to keep my job. But quiet quitting or that thing, it doesn't serve any of us, right? And I guess the only weapon that I can use is the transparency of the realities of running of a business. Like I would love to have high quality Class A office space that you can come to 3 times a month. And I would love to pay for your gym membership, which you can use during the middle of the fucking day. Sorry. I would love to do all of those things, but also that comes from the same bucket of money that I pay your salaries from, and I know that you all want more salary. And so it's just trying to be transparent about, and I know everybody wants a different thing, right? Some people want to be fully remote. Some people want all in the office, and they want to be all in the office if everybody else is in the office. And, it gets so complicated. I think it's talking through the decisions and letting people it's not that you have a vote, but you have some insight into, we're dealing with finite dollars and we have to make some choices and we're doing the best that we can. And I ain't the man, I'm with you, and we're trying to make money from doing work. Mm-hmm. and work kind of sucks, but it doesn't have to be terrible.
Right.
And so it sucks the least with me. Come on. So that's our approach.
Booyah's hiring, I'm pretty sure.
We're hiring.
Yeah. So in that same vein then, when we're talking about culture, that's usually what it comes down to, right? Is that so when companies are trying to determine, do we have a fully remote presence and, no office space? Do we have this mandated office workplace where, we're paying for it, so you better show up and, we'll give you some snacks along the way, but you better be there. For you guys personally, how important is having a physical workplace to that idea of building culture?
Yeah, I think that there's always going to be an element of we need to have in-person interactions to form those interpersonal relationships and to just like create a more well-rounded workplace across the board. It's tough because, I really do enjoy working from home. Pre-pandemic, I hated it. We had our work from wherever days 2 days a week, and you would never catch me at home unless it was a day that I really had nothing going on, and I was like, well, I guess I'll just like hang out. But now it's like I really value the flexibility that I have in working from home. But that being said, like I know that like I'm going to be much more effective in doing a lot of what I can do to help our employees if there is some sort of in-person opportunity. And having a lot of conversations with our employees who are completely remote, whether they started out, at completely remote or not, it's isolating a lot of the time. They want to be able to come in and see their coworkers and have those experiences that, we have a lot of conversations with, folks from like, oh, remember that time when we did this thing a few years ago and we all were together and it was so much fun. And then everybody else who's, has come on later is like, that would be nice if I could also do that. I like karaoke too. And so it's looking for those opportunities. So, I think we try to do 2 in-person retreats a year, regardless. That's not just now, that was the thing that we've always done, but looking for opportunities for people to come to like our office destinations, as I mentioned, what we call them. We want people to, come to Denver and sit in the office with folks. We want people to go to Austin and like sit in the office with folks if people are like willing to do that. I think that, there's just always going to be the need for some sort of in-person element to having a well-rounded workplace. Like Drew was saying, there are always going to be people who want to completely work from home. There are always going to be people who only ever want to work in the office. But I think for the the majority of us, we're kind of like sit somewhere in the middle now. And it's like, I like having the flexibility, but I also know that, I'm going to get a little lonely if I sit at home all by myself all the time. So.
Trey, I think your recruiting tagline should be, though, work kind of sucks, but it doesn't have to be terrible. Just right there on your careers page. So, personally, I love hybrid. I love being able to get into an office. For anybody who knows me well, somebody I follow really closely is Adam Grant, organizational psychologist and professor at Wharton. But he's got a podcast called Work Life, which every time I listen to it, it gets me thinking about something, And he did an episode, this is years ago, and he talked about this term of integrators versus segmenters, right? And your integrator is your employee who shows up at the office, stays late, hangs out with like coworkers, right? They've got pictures of their kids all over their desk. They have like created this like integration, right, between their personal and professional life. And then you have segmenters on an extreme level. You'd have the person that maybe even has like a separate cell phone, right, for work calls. They don't like put any pictures of their kids on their desk when they're at work. They're not really into chit chat, but they're just doing their work. And it's not, and you shouldn't mistake one for being better than the other, right? You can have wonderful employees as far as the work that's getting done in both camps. But I think, thinking about it in those terms, it really makes sort of like, hopefully as I say that, you probably all have like coworkers or employees and you're thinking of like, oh yeah, they're a segmenter or they're an integrator, right? But going back to, we have these workforces that are then kind of like forced into this sort of like hybrid and remote situation. My opinion is that as we kind of work through this, I think as a company you need to take a stand, or at least like make a decision around if you want to be hybrid or if you want to be remote ultimately. And it doesn't have to happen right now, but I think that you're going to have to make that determination, because you're going to have those employees that want to have that integration, and they're going to have the highest level of engagement if they have access to the office. And then you're going to have those other employees who want to work independently. Maybe they're at a stage of their life where their priority is their family and other things, and they don't need all the other stuff, right? But I think if you try to do both, what my fear is that you end up with a very diluted culture, right? You have these people who are really engaged and these people who are not, or even like, so my sister works for a 100% remote company, and they were established as 100% remote. And so they have budget to send everybody a VR set when they onboard, to take a trip to Greece, which they just did, because they're not spending the money on the office, right? So my opinion is that to really have like a very robust culture, you're gonna have to make a decision at some point to kind of decide which way you want to go. And I think we're all kind of like getting through the murky part right now, but on the tail end of this, I think you're going to have to make that decision.
Great. Tom, what are you seeing just kind of overall, any interesting approaches to this idea of workplace and how it might be changing overall? So, we kind of think of, the office of the past, and the terrible standard, of course, was the office from Office Space, right? Just sea of cubicles, and I don't think that's the type of workplace that anybody wants to go back to. And hopefully nobody ever had to work in a place like that before. There is this psychology of space and how it can help or hinder productivity and kind of some of your goals. So as you're seeing from your side, what are some of these workplace practices for the clients that are choosing to have a workplace? What are they including? What's important to them? What are they, saying this has to be a priority for us?
So everything's a little all over the map. I would say by and large, we have some clients that have reduced their footprint because they just don't need the space because people are remote or certain lines of business in an organization have gone remote. Like we've seen a lot of clients that operate call centers that had these big call center spaces. Basically, a lot of them are abandoning that because they've been so successful in their teams working remote and delivering and being productive and being engaging with clients. What we are seeing is space being utilized as a way to train, to mentor, to bring people together, to collaborate in person. We keep talking about the design of space the way you thought about being in college, where nothing had your name on it. So the opportunity is that you're utilizing the space in the best way possible for yourself as an individual. So if you need to be heads down, there's space designed for you to be focused and working on something that's an individual-based task. Then there's space that's designed to bring people together to work collaboratively on a project. That could be in a room, that could be out in the open, it could be outside. So we're looking at these varieties of settings. And what I think we've learned with people working remote is recognizing the representation of how people process information and how they do their best work, because we all do it differently. So we put a lot of focus on neurodiversity and being able to design space that supports lots of different ways in which you process information and how the space supports that. So some folks do their best work in loud, crowded environments, and that's cool. There should be space that's designed to do that. Then there are folks that really do their best work in a very quiet, maybe it's even a darker environment, and maybe it's not got a lot of access to other folks, making sure that those environments are included as well. So I think a lot of our clients are asking for and looking at that kind of variety so that folks can be as comfortable and as productive as possible and feel like, okay, it's not so much like I'm making a choice to be at home because it's better than being at work or vice versa. So that's kind of where we're moving. Does that help?
Yes.
Okay.
Any other thoughts from panelists around what workplace elements are good for for your teams?
So I'm with you conceptually, Tom, on that. It's like people want to have a place to collaborate, and then they also want it to be dead ass quiet so that they can concentrate. We just don't have the money for all of these different kinds of spaces. So the way I see ours, like our design budget is Havenly budgeted, right? Like I got $149 to design this office. It'd probably work, wouldn't it? Yeah. See, I knew this panel was going to pay off. We just don't have the cash for it. So the way we think of the space is actually it's a showroom. It's a showroom for clients and prospects and people that we want to hire, and it's a place to onboard your people in their first few weeks. Our at pandemic, we had signed a 7-year lease months before pandemic for 108 people, right? We shrunk it down to 25. I rarely can get 25 people into the office. Unless we're going to a baseball game, then 80 people will show up here and submit their parking ticket for reimbursement. And then 70 of them might go to the baseball game. So it's just, we think of it as it's a showroom. It's a showroom, so we try to make it look good for Zoom backgrounds and client visits and vendor visits, and so it looks real. And if we had unlimited funds, I would have a dark area and a light area and a play area and a quiet area and a loud area.
I get it.
Yeah.
I appreciate it. I don't think it's necessarily about having to spend money to be able to think through where people can be productive. And, does it mean that desk I was sitting at that's here and it's facing everyone, it gets turned around and faces the wall instead? I think it's those kinds of moves that can happen to help people feel more comfortable in the space and still look like the showroom. Because I completely get you need a backdrop and you need a space that's seductive, right? You've got to get that next client so everyone can go to a baseball game, right? And so the space has to perform like in that theater-like kind of way. And hopefully at the same time you've got a couple people moving around in there and so that client's like, yeah, these guys are a shop that are doing something. So it could just be it's minor tweaks that get people that without going, shit, I got to go buy ping pong tables and no, I get that. Yeah, so little things to just make people a little bit more comfortable. Yeah.
I think one of the interesting things about the pandemic overall is that, regardless of where you land, whether you are remote first or office first or somewhere in the middle, it's really forced people to think and to actually consider the what ifs and consider the whys behind what we're doing. Like, do we have an office just because that's what everybody does and you have an office and it's got cubicles and private offices? Or, is there a way that we can, still have our company that is built around culture? What else is out there? So it's really sort of broken things, opened up the door to explore just a little bit more about, what might be out there. The flip side of that is that can be exhausting to be thinking all the time. And is this working? Is it not? How's it actually going for us? So kind of last question that I've got, and we'll have all of the panelists answer this, is that I don't think anybody has said quite yet, like, we've arrived at the solution. We know exactly what, we're going to look like 6 months from now, a year from now, 3 years from now. I feel like we're still a little bit in that test and learn environment. But while we're in that test and learn environment and in that test and learn mindset, what are the ways that you personally would say that you might be measuring the effectiveness of something, whether it's a workplace, a hybrid policy? What are some of those guideposts that you're looking to help you determine, do we need to shift? Do we need to adjust anything? Or are we still on the right track?
Maybe to start. I think as basic as it sounds, retention and attrition, right? What does that look like? Our stance has been, if we can hire locally, we'll hire locally. If we have multiple candidates in the candidate pool and it comes out to a two-way tie and one's local, we'll hire the local one, knowing that somewhere in the future we may go back to more of a I don't think we're never going to go back full time into the office, but just having like at least a requirement of 1 or 2 days. But I think in those situations where you do have employees maybe who are in the same role and one's remote and one's in person, I would look closely at kind of like what their engagement with the company looks like. How are they performing in their roles? So they have the same level of kind of context of just sort of what's going on in the organization. I think for those of you who hopefully everyone's doing engagement surveys regularly, really important to make sure that engagement survey is consistent year over year so you can benchmark that data. And if you can grab demographic data around in-person versus remote employees just to get a sense of what does that level of engagement look like between those two groups, that would be another one that I would look at pretty carefully.
Yeah, I think in the same vein, we do a lot of that at Inc. where we are asking people consistently, how are you feeling about this? And you're sending out multiple surveys and all of that good stuff. And so we have, a whole sheet of KPIs that we keep track of, for employee engagement on all of the tools that we use, whether it's, our buddy system or whether it's our peer-to-peer recognition system. Like, how many people are actually using it? Are the people who are using it, using it meaningfully? And so I think that is like a really big thing. I think is just looking at those numbers and being able to sort of like quantify some of these more like qualitative, aspects of work. Yeah, that's it.
Well, okay, so maybe unpacking it, like, why do you try to have a good culture? You try to have a good culture so that you can retain talent. And it's more fun to work in a good culture, right? But you're trying to retain talent. So I think until I hear that the work from home or work from the office or a hybrid solution that we have, until that starts showing up in the exit interviews of why people leave, I'm going to keep going the way we're going. And that is, the way we're going is a little bit of the kind of the Steve Jobs thought of like, people don't know what they want until you show it to them, right? Like they can't say what they want. And so we're just trying to show them something. And then we'll know that we've either struck the chord or we've goofed it up real bad and they start to leave. But until they leave, I'm going to assume we haven't goofed it up and keep trying.
Nice. All right, Tom, you get final word.
I think for us, it's checking in with our clients to see if the space is working. It's being able to do post-occupancy surveys and understanding, how the space is performing and being able to have the engagement with a client to say, hey, this is what's working, this is what's not working based on the decisions we collectively made. Here's some recommendations on how to change that so that we could go back and survey again to see if we're getting some success. I mean, for us right now, it's talking to our clients to see, are people coming in? Are they utilizing the space as we all thought it could be utilized? And, do they find success in the fact that we've collectively created a sense of place for their organization, their community, their culture that's working for them? Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you guys so much. Really appreciate everybody's thoughts. We have some time for questions and applause as well. Thank you. Yeah. Won't stop that. Any questions from the audience? Yes.
My question is around budget. So, we talk about all these things and all these solutions, right? Obviously, Troy, you mentioned it quite a few times. But in the conversations that you have with clients or internally at, floor table, where is that budget coming from? Is it reallocated from like your real estate or office budget? Is it like a new line item that you're like, well, put this over here and this is TBD, what it could be? Just curious what those conversations are and how they're going.
For us, it's bad news. It's incremental and additional budget, right? So we have a smaller office, but a nicer office. So we still have a real estate liability. And then also people expect a home office to be furnished and provided by me. So those double monitors and all that stuff, that's our equipment. And it has to be shipped. and then shipped out and shipped back and all of that stuff. And then we do want them to come to the office to be part of the events and be part of the cultural calendar. So we got to fly them in for Halloween party. And they have to go into a hotel room for the baseball game. And it is more expensive. And so it's an incremental line item. And for us, it comes out of the margin. And it blows. I don't know another way to say it, because I can't roll over and do it I can't pass that down as a gas charge to the client. So the employee wants more stuff, more money, and 2 offices.
Anyone else?
I guess, just like the point I was trying to make before, just about making that decision between remote and hybrid, that's a huge consideration, right? Because you are going to have the people that work. We're in that situation right now. We have people who work in the office a couple days a week, and then they want like a home office stipend. And like all of a sudden as a company, we've gone from like, oh no, we provided this office, to now like we have to support both for all employees. So that budget doesn't exist, right? And we end up saying no to a lot of requests. I mean, I think if you explain to them, like, we have this office, we're paying for this office, you can be here, right, 5 days a week, particularly for the local employees. I mean, we have a little leeway because some of our like employee gifting things are like designs for their home and like gift card budgets to like use in our e-shop and stuff like that, right? So yeah.
Yes.
I have a question. Trying to think of the best way to phrase this, but I've been interested in workplace strategy for I remember from the other sessions maybe 4 or 5 years ago at Startup Week. So for a very long time, and then pre-COVID, I've been interested in this. And then I was hired during COVID to work for a very, very large company. And since day one, have been like pulling in threads to figure out what their plan is. Are they making us go back? Not for my own, from that workplace strategy perspective. And one of my biggest questions, you already spoke to a bit about like the trends that you're seeing in the office place, like the collaboration maybe being more relevant. But then balancing that with what you were saying about what people say they want and what people are actually doing is very different. So my question kind of merges those two, which is that my company and everyone I've tried to pull these threads on, talking to people around the world and where it's headed, it seems like they're jumping into some of what you're saying about, okay, if people are coming into the office to collaborate and that sort of thing. But like the research doesn't seem to be back far up far enough to say, yes, they want to collaborate, but they're not going to pay $40 for parking. And so I'm curious, like from either a design perspective or a research perspective, do either of you have thoughts on like how to better like mesh those kind of, there's this big, huge gap in my mind, and I'm curious, like has there been research that you found to be more successful or design that's been more successful in sort of closing that gap?
Sure. From my perspective, our teams are spending as much time coming up with great concepts and design solutions and ideas, as well as sitting down and going through all kinds of operational issues to ensure that there's going to be some success. So to your point, I've got a client right now where we're designing this headquarters, and we're going to provide this high-end fitness center. It's amazing. And we've gone through this process of recognizing that the folks that are working at home will drive in, park their car in the garage, use the gym facility, and probably get back in the car and go home to do their job, right? So then we're like, well, what does that mean? How can you entice that person to actually stay? Are they paying for parking? How much is it going to be at an employee cost to use this super cool fitness center, right? So all of these decision points start to feed into the overall impact in terms of the strategy and ultimately what's the value back to the organization.
I'd also add to
It's
that.
a lot of time.
It is, yeah.
We don't get paid
there,
for it.
I do somewhat feel like there is a little bit of like, let's try this. Is that going to work? Is this going to work? And at some point, as we're kind of the farther away that we get, I think you're right. I think there is a gap in data right now, just because of, the time. It hasn't been enough time for people to develop the new habits and the new work styles. I think the thing that I'm starting to see just a minor shift towards, though, is that the companies that are hoping, or, without flat out saying you've got to be in the office 5 days a week, the companies that are hoping for people to be in the office more are the ones that are starting to craft that message and being a little bit more direct in communication to say, if they say, we're a flexible company, but we'd like you to be in the office more time versus less time during the week, that's a much more direct message than we're flexible, you can do what you want, and then hoping that people show up if what they're really trying to say is we'd like you to be in the office 60% of the time or more. So that's a very fine line that a lot of companies are walking right now, and I think that the more we continue, people will get a little bit more direct about those expectations, which will also then just kind of start to provide a little bit more of that, what's working, what's not, or are people being told that they're expected to show up if we want them to show up. Rick.
Do you think this whole dynamic changes with a 5.5% unemployment?
Really good question. No. Well, let me say it this way, because I think this is the question you're asking. As we slip into recession and maybe flirt with depression, I'd easily be able to tell people to come to the office and get to work, right? It is partly it is a matter of leverage today. It really is. And that's why I like option. Like what I love about having an office in this building is the walls are cheap to move. Like it's not expensive to move those walls around and flip desks and try a different thing. Our office refresh from 80 down to 25 was a big deal, but it wasn't that big of a check, all things considered. So it was an experiment, and it's an experiment that we could do again. And to your question on data, I don't think there's good data for it, but I also don't think we're even asking the right questions. Because people can't articulate what it is they want to do. Nobody has a concept of, I would really like to be to the office to collaborate. The reason I think people come to the office, like what we actually see, is because we have better air conditioning than they have at home, or we have better heat than they have at home, or we have kegs that they don't have at home, or we have, we're closer to their gym that they want to go to at lunchtime. Like it's all things that actually don't have much to do with work, which is a weird thing for a boss to say, but I think that's what I observe, is that they're coming for a different set of reasons, or they think he's cute, or they it's just, I think it's just true. Yeah. And so for that reason, our approach is kind of just to get people to sample it as much as possible to find out if there's something there for them. And if they can sample it and find out there's something there for them, then maybe we've got it. But everybody has a different why. And so the people that come for the cookies that show up from vendors, right?
Well, I think that's it, right? The different why. I mean, we have to also recognize on the flip side, working from home isn't great for a lot of people too.
Not everybody has a home office.
Not everyone has a home office. In New York, you're living in Brooklyn in a 2-bedroom apartment with 5 roommates. You can't sit on a bed and with a laptop and work. Or you might not have a pleasant home life. And work is your refuge. And you want, I think, to provide that opportunity for folks to get the hell out of their house. So I think there's two sides to it, but I think it's all about the economy. I mean, a couple of months ago, I felt like if the financial markets could figure out how to go to 4 days, which I think is virtually impossible, would we collectively as a society go to a 4-day work week? Would that be the outcome of this whole experiment and experience? I just don't think the financial markets, which is a worldwide thing, I don't know if that's a possibility. Though, in New York, all trades got executed from people's home offices. They all figured out how to continue to do that level of work that we've been trained as designers, had to design these big trading floors for all that kind of activity. They were doing it from home. So I don't know. I feel like if we don't go into a recession, if we don't skirt a depression, if there's not another freaking war in the world, right? Do we, as a culture, as a society in the U.S., start to really think about work in a completely different way? I think that there's generations that are not mine, my own, that are completely looking for that.
So I believe my proposal would be, let's do this panel again next year and see where we land, see what's stuck, what's not stuck, and hopefully this has been informative and helpful for everybody. If you have additional questions, we'll be up here for a little bit, so happy to chat with anybody. Thank you, guys.